Well-known economist Dr. Arvind Veermani, who was former executive director at IMF and also former chief economic advisor, Ministry of Finance, is with us in studio. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us. Mr. Raghuram Rajan saying there that India is a beacon of stability that needs to be sustained. The RBI could approach this in an accommodative way depending on what the budget has. How do you view that?
So if we recall last year, in the pre-budget, which as you just pointed out is the last of the financial year, his monetary policy statement, last year also the RBI didn't take any action before the budget and had a similar sort of indication. So presumably depending on what is there in the budget, it could take action after the budget as it did last year.
But he also did talk about structural reforms that are in the budget,
right.
And also the finance minister referred to structural reforms. What are the kind of structural reforms we're talking about?
So there are two issues one is the monetary fiscal balance, which means the aggregate, the target has been laid out by the finance minister last year.
Right.
And if he sticks to that, that's one aspect. The second, when we talk about structural reform, there are two or three aspects. One is the reform of the transfers, subsidies. For example, the LPG subsidy going on now maybe to kerosene and other food and other things. So that will be something everybody will watch. And the second aspect is tax reform. Of course, the CIT, the corporate income tax reform has been promised, and that's another type of structural reform.
Right.
And finally, the kind of shift and more allocation to investment, which has a high multiplier in infrastructure. So these are three basic structural reforms.
And when we look at the focus of the finance minister today, when he talked at this Manrega 10 years, he did say that there's such a lot of support to the rural economy. Infrastructure of the rural economy is the emphasis, is the priority. Looking at that from the budget point of view and public spending, is that necessarily something that will go against the structural reforms?
Not really, because as part of that infrastructure, it's a question of where more or less money will be spent. I guess there have been some indications from the finance minister that there will be more done on the agriculture irrigation side next year, which is needed, perhaps, along with the policy reforms, not just expenditures. And of course,
does this have a good multiplier effect, as you were saying? All these policies that were mentioned?
All effect. I mean, the question is, if you do effective and efficient infrastructure development, it will have a big multiplier effect compared to just giving subsidies. So, for example, if there's fertilizer reform and money is given directly to farmers and leakages decrease, that extra money can be spent much more effectively on irrigation and other agricultural expenditures.
And even with Manrega, when we look at the expenditure on Manrega, it's also associated with agricultural development.
Right. So that's the second part I was just going to say. That's good you asked, because that is really the Manrega is basically had two objectives. One is this monsoon cycle.
Right.
And of course, we've been through 2 consecutive monsoons. So in a way, this is a good test of Manrega, because this is really the kind of situation in which Manrega was very much needed. And so at least the numbers which you have read out, presuming they are correct, it's been a good test that money has been spent when it was needed very much by the people.
So also that Manrega is going to be associated now with skill development, and you see that people are going to be taken out of the vicious cycle of poverty, given some sort of a long-term objective to their employment. That is a policy in the right direction in the future also.
Yeah, the development of rural skills is
We've got 18 lakh of these workers of Manrega who will be trained in skill development as well.
Right. Well, there's two different things. One is overlap of these 2 programs.
That's right.
And that's kind of a tricky thing, but if it's just the money allocated to Manrega is used to do skill development effectively, that's a great thing. But sometimes there's a difficulty in coordinating programs. If that problem is handled, then it'll be great. But as far as skills itself is concerned, it's a very important long-term development, is to focus on these kind of what I always call the lower and middle skills. We generally talk about high skills, which are clearly needed by industry and urban areas. But the rural area need basic skills of agriculture, irrigation. Many people, or in many areas, they may not know about drip irrigation, etc. You have to train them to do these things. So that is part of this agricultural irrigation reform, and would then increase the effectiveness of other infrastructure expenditures.
You talk about industry. The finance minister says not enough private sector investment coming in. That's how do you view that? What kind of a sign is he sending out?
Right. So that's a problem which we've kind of been discussing for the last 2-3 years, and every year we think private investment will recover. It hasn't. So this investment cycle has been pushed out, and the main reason actually is the global situation. We've discussed oil prices, commodity prices, etc. So the globalized part of the Indian economy is kind of stuck with this excess demand, excess supply arising from China, etc.
Right.
So we can't do much about that. So we have to focus on these other things which are more domestic and local, some of which we've just discussed, but also other things like construction, etc., which are more related to monetary.
And one last question, because it could be related to that, is the RBI looking at the startup. It's going to create a new ecosystem for startups. It's going to work on it as well.
Right. So here, one had, because of the problem of funding coming for terrorists, etc., there is a tendency in the banking system to become more, to restrict ease of business. So I'm glad he mentioned it for a broader purpose. Of course, if it helps startups, that's also a good thing. But they need to look at the processes and so on, and participate in the ease of doing business.
Dr. Arvind Veermani, thank you very much for joining us here on Newsnight.